I went to the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America's seminary, Lutheran seminary program here in Austin. It's housed downtown on the Episcopal Seminary campus. We share down there because it turns out that the Episcopal Church of the United States and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America have what they call altar fellowship. That means that our ordained pastors can share of the things that happen around the altar, of the offering and giving of Holy Communion, the sharing of the Word, and the reminding people of the forgiveness and grace of Jesus. When I was there, and after the last couple of years, Pastor Brad was at the exact same place, we had chapel every single day. And so 3 out of the 5 times, chapel was Episcopal, Book of Common Prayer chapel, and then twice it was Lutheran, ELW chapel or whatever else. You know, Lutherans always are trying all these other different things, so we'd have all kinds of different chapel experiences. And here's another thing about the ELCA, the Lutheran Church, that you might not know, and that is that we are one of the few that are educating pastors that still require what's called an internship. We're one of the few seminary programs that still recognizes that the experience of an entire year on internship would be important for the formation of the leadership of the ordained pastor. And so, when my internship year came out, was I ever surprised? You see, here's the thing. Not married, no kids, don't even have a pet. Easy to send me anywhere. And so I got so excited when I got the call because I was going to Colorado. I was so psyched. Lyman, Colorado. Anybody heard of it? Here we got some Colorado friends visiting. Lyman, Colorado is spitting distance from Kansas and just as flat. And there are absolutely no mountains to be seen anywhere. Now, growing up in South Dakota, I was ready for the kinds of winters that I knew we'd end up having in Lyman. But Lyman has like 5 major highways that connect. It's like a big old spider web right there. And I'd never seen before the big, huge arms that come down and shut down the highways when there's a storm. Now, I guess that's everywhere anymore, but back in that time, which was just a little over 10 years ago, that's the first time I'd ever seen that. So I took off to Lyman, Colorado for my internship. It was a community of 1,800 people. And as I came to the little church in Lyman, I noticed that 2 blocks down the street, there was a little Episcopal church as well. Now, Lyman being about 90 miles from anywhere, absolutely anywhere, didn't ever really have full-time pastors at those churches. And so having me there every day was fantastic for the community. But the little Episcopal church had a pastor or a priest that came and served them that lived in Loveland. So the first huge snowfall, the first arm coming down on a Sunday at 6 a.m., I get the call from the priest in Loveland. I've never even met the guy. And he calls and says, I'm not going to make it to worship. So since the Episcopal worship service is 8:30 and the Lutheran service isn't until 10, we'll let you take care of us. And here's the thing, interns aren't allowed to offer Holy Communion generally. They have to get special dispensation from the bishop. But since Lyman was 90 miles from anywhere, the bishop had given me that dispensation for that church. But the priest that was in Loveland said, oh, we don't care. It doesn't say anything about that in the Bible. Just go do it. So with great trepidation, I went over to the little Episcopal church in Lyman, Colorado. It was a beautiful little A-frame church. And when you went into this church, it had plush red carpet, beautiful dark wood pews everywhere, and it didn't smell like mold like I often see at little old tiny. It smelled like furniture polish, that lovely smell. And it was beautiful. But what I will never forget is how nervous I got when I confronted a poster right inside the door. A big, huge poster that said, "At this church, don't check your brain at the door." And I went, oh no, you mean there's people who are really going to think? They're going to listen to what I have to say. They're going to pay attention, and they're going to expect it to be theologically correct. Well, I must have done okay, because I got more calls. Whenever it snowed, I'd get the call, and I'd go and take care of the Episcopal Church as well as the Lutheran Church. Our story today that we read from the Gospel of Luke is part of our series, To Love the Lord Your God with All Your Heart, Soul, Mind, and Strength. And today we are on the mind. We're going to talk about knowing how to love God with our mind, that muscle that is our brain. There are so many things that are clamoring to get our attention in this day. Everything from advertisements to blingy lights everywhere. Even on your blue jeans there's bling anymore. Everything's getting your eyes and your attention. And so much of it has to do with things and possession and scarcity. So hold what you have close. Our minds are called upon every day, constantly, to make decisions about how we will live and be in this world. The story that Jesus tells, the parable that Jesus tells to the man asking to get even more, to pull even more into himself, is a story to make us stop and think about our minds and our relationships and our purpose. I think that the Jewish people, and especially our Jewish Jesus, uses parables because they know that parables cause people to think. They don't give easy answers. In Godly Play, what they say when they start a parable is they say, parables are flat. Took me a long time to figure that out. You see, parables don't just have one side. They have other sides. It could be about this, or it could be about that. In fact, probably every time you hear a parable, you might think of something different that it might mean for you. The parable today calls the man that was asking for Jesus' help to think about being in relationship, in community, instead of being barn builders. And so, as I'm doing a little research to get ready for this, I found some articles online that have been written by a Dr. Anthony, I thought I'd remember it, Newberg. Anthony Newberg. It turns out, I talked about this a little bit at our church council meeting last Tuesday night, and so I got a phone call from Philip saying, hey, what you were talking about, Lori Donovan, knows more about. So I checked with Lori. She brought me a stack of books. Educators, you know. And so I looked at one of the books was written by Dr. Newberg. How interesting was that? And it was all about the mapping of the brain. It was very interesting. So what I looked online, it had pictures and all kinds of wonderful stuff. This doctor studied Buddhist monks that were busy chanting, nuns that were busy with beads and prayer. It studied Sikhs that were in repetitive chant meditations. It studied people who were in repetitive or consistent spiritual practices. And it discovered that one of the lobes of the brain, part of that lobe shut down. The part that was about anxiety, fear, restlessness, it shut down. Well, another part of that lobe became more active. Or in the pictures, if you look, they become red. The part that makes you be comfortable with where you are. The part that makes you be selfless. That makes you realize that you are a part of a much greater whole. the part that makes you stronger, becomes active because of spiritual practice. Who knew? God hardwired us to be faithful, spiritual people. And part of that doctor's continued study is that whenever spiritual people were entered into a new experience, that their brain synapses got stronger. Now, for children, it's much easier than it is for adults. For adults, it's just kind of like falling. When children fall, it's easier to get back up. For adults, it's harder to make that brain stuff happen, those changes to make you stronger. But it's not impossible. It's not. So there's a few things that I think I learned from this study. The good news of loving the Lord your God with all your mind is, number one, it is possible to be stronger in your relationship, to bring yourself closer and closer, closer and closer to God through spiritual practice. And it's not a flash in the pan kind of thing like, oh, well, I tried that and it didn't work. They actually studied some Methodist pastor that prayed for 2 hours every morning, and those 2 hours made him so much stronger, so much more of his brain was active. Now, I'm sure, well, some of you have 2 hours time to do that, but maybe most of you don't. But anything that you can do to help yourself become ritualistic in your spiritual practice will help you to be mindful of the things of God. The other thing that I think I learned from this, the other point of good news, is that people can change. We can transform our minds. We can do exercise to make our brains work better, be healthier, stronger individuals. There's so much that the world is asking of us. And I really think all we have to do is take a deep breath and be mindful of the things of God, to be in prayer, in study, in worship, to sing, to have your own way of loving God, to call it on yourself. Now, I tried to get online earlier this week to see if I could order that poster. I couldn't find it. So I think the best we're going to do is to be able to ask our communications person, Diane Albin, to make us our own poster that says, here at Abiding Love, don't check your brain at the door. Amen.